Kevin, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here today. And we get to talk about the state of California, right? You're a representative here, representing the 4th District here in the state of California. Thank you for representing us well during COVID. That was an amazing journey that we went on, and we felt your support along the way. So, state of California, you know, I'm a native of California, grew up in California. I love this state. People are leaving our state. People are like, I want out. What is your vision to make California resurge and become the kind of state we can become?
Well, we just need to have a halfway decent government. I mean, California has, so much to offer. You got to try real hard to, mess it up and make it a state that suddenly people want to leave in mass. But that's what we're seeing happen. I mean, last year, for the first time in California's 170-year history, the population actually declined by 182,000 people. This last decade, for the census results that just came out, we actually lost a seat in Congress. And so this used to be the state where, anyone could get ahead, where the American dream was realized in its full glory. And now it's the state that so many people can't wait to leave behind. And what you just said, I hear people all the time that say, I was born and raised in California. I love this state, but it just is so hard to get by here. And people want to stay. They want to be able to build their career here, raise their family here, and retire here. But we're just making it so difficult for people. And so, I got involved with this recall campaign, and I ran for office in the first place to try to reverse this trajectory, to restore integrity to our state government. And I think that now, over this next 4 days, we have a golden opportunity to really return to the idea of government by the people and to start leading the country in the right ways again.
So I believe California could be the crown jewel of the United States of America. You are in the legislature. How do things work in Sacramento? It doesn't seem like anything gets done.
No, they don't work. That's the thing. And you're right, things do get done, but it's not the things that need to be done.
Right.
Which is why I kind of say we need to get back to basics, manage our forests, pave our roads, store our water, maintain our grid, fund our police, do the things government is supposed to do them well, and do nothing else. Whereas the reality of life at our capital, as I've seen all too clearly over the last 5 years, is we have a government that does not serve the people of our state. To the contrary, it is completely owned by special interests and lobbyists that pursue their own agenda, that have captured our state legislature so that we continue to pay more and more in taxes, the state continues to accumulate more and more power, yet our quality of life continues to get worse and worse. I mean, why is it, Pastor Greg, that we pay the highest gas taxes yet drive over the deepest potholes?
Yeah.
Why is it we've had the worst lockdowns in the country during COVID, yet have had some of the worst public health outcomes? It's the same story everywhere you look. In California, we sacrifice the most and we get the least in return. The reason for that is our state government is fundamentally broken. And what has broken it is political corruption. Corruption that is personified like no one ever has by Gavin Newsom. So I believe that by removing him from office, by recalling him in a movement of the people of California, it's a chance to change the whole ball game at our capital.
Yeah, 2.2 million people signed a petition saying, let's recall him. So we have to get question 1 right.
Correct.
How important is it on the 14th to mark yes on question 1?
It's vitally important, because if we don't get over 50% on question 1, it doesn't matter who comes out on top on question 2. It's irrelevant at that point. And so that's why I say I'm obviously a candidate on question 2. I'd prefer that you find my name, Kevin Kiley, on the second question. There are a number of Kevins, so I have to specify the last name. But whoever you want to vote for, question 1 is the most important thing. And so, and that ultimately is the spirit of the recall as well, is that this is a movement of the people to reclaim control over our state government. And whoever the top person is on question 2, they really should just be a bearer of the torch for that movement. And I happen to think, by the way, that the candidate that succeeds is going to be the person who best contrasts themselves with Gavin Newsom, who shows in a sense that they will be his polar opposite.
Yes. So what role, I think people would be interested, what role did you play in helping the recall?
So I got involved in the recall last year after having spent quite a few months since this whole COVID era began, fighting against Gavin Newsom's one-man rule in every way I could. I took him to court along with James Gallagher, and we sued him for abusing his emergency powers, actually won a trial in Superior Court in Sutter County. I introduced resolutions in the legislature to terminate the state of emergency. We wrote what we called the Healthy Communities Resolution and took it to counties across the state. Over a dozen passed it to protest the lockdowns, including here in Placer County. But kind of while all of this was going on, like the recall was sort of humming along in the background, you know, brick by brick, signature by signature, ordinary people, not politicians like me, not the state party, ordinary citizens in their communities were building what became the greatest citizens movement in California history. So I joined forces with the recall. I came to see it as sort of bringing a whole different element to the equation. You know, the people of our state putting their mark directly on our state government. And so I got involved really just in a supporting role, to support the folks who are out there making this happen, gathering signatures, putting their lives on hold, going out every weekend. A lot of people who had never even been involved in politics before, a lot of people who are Democrats, independents, Bernie-crats, but who are saying enough is enough. So I held something like 40 to 50 events during the signature gathering throughout the state to try to support the people who are out there to try to propel this forward. And you know, I only got involved as a candidate when I heard from thousands of those people that I'd met along the way who said that we, you know, think you could sort of be someone who can carry the torch of what this movement's all about.
That's great. Thank you for doing that. Question here. Let's hit some issues. We have 160,000 people who are homeless in our state. I just came from downtown Sacramento. The drive up Highway 80. I couldn't believe it. This is not an issue. This is a crisis. How do you, as governor, fix this problem?
Well, you're right. It's a crisis, and it's a complete moral outrage. You know, we have more wealth in California than all but 5 countries. You have thousands of people living, languishing, dying on our streets, and it has gotten much, much worse just in the time since Gavin Newsom became governor. This is not inevitable. Other states across the country, homelessness is going down. It's going up in California. In fact, to the point that right now our unsheltered homeless population, this is a staggering statistic, is 9 times larger than the next closest state. 9 times larger. And what's the solution that we've gotten from our current political leadership? Just keep throwing more and more money at the problem. $12 billion more just this year. In fact, when the governor comes out and says, oh yeah, we're doing something about homelessness, that's all he really says, oh, X billion dollars more, even though his own top advisor, the governor's mental health czar, said in an interview in March that homelessness in California is not a money problem, it's a leadership problem. So what would I do? I'd bring new leadership. I've actually tried to do this from the legislature by proposing audits of where all the homelessness spending is going, but the governor has gotten in the way and interfered and prevented those audits from being conducted. And so I would first want to figure out why it is that we're spending so much money and getting so little in return. But then I'd look at what's actually worked in other states. I mean, this isn't brain surgery. Other states are doing good things. And you know, the first and most important thing is you need to have some sort of shelter away from where people live, where those who are on the streets can be directed. That's what the courts have said, that you can't ask them to move along unless there's a place for them to go. Then once they get to that place, you need to connect them with the services that have been shown to work. Mental health counseling, substance abuse treatment, family reunification, job training, and so forth.
That's great. So along with our governor messing up that, he's also messed up during the pandemic of shutting down churches. You know, he said you cannot gather, which is a violation of our First Amendment. So again, would you ever use your executive authority to say, even in a pandemic, would you say churches can't meet in person?
No, of course I wouldn't do that. It's unthinkable that this was actually done, that the government literally shut down churches and did more here in California than in any other state, resulting in 5 separate decisions by the United States Supreme Court, and now millions of dollars in attorney's fees, by the way, that taxpayers are having to pay for that. Could you think of a worse use of taxpayer money than violating the first freedom of our country? And you know, you say that he messed this up. I think that's putting it a little generously. I mean, you know, I mean, it's true that people sort of, you know, those in power throughout history have wanted to stop, have preferred that people not gather for any reason. You know, seditious ideas can take root like freedom and liberty and self-determination when people get together. But I think it's actually a vibrant faith community that poses perhaps the biggest threat to a corrupt government. You know, by bringing people together, by teaching transcendent principles and values, by providing a sense of meaning and purpose. All of that runs contrary to the goal of maximum government control, and we have been living in this very dark era of government control for the last year and a half, which has been darker in California than anywhere.
You know, the evangelical community in California really does, if they would rise up, have a voice, and they could make things really good for California if they would use their voice and also vote the right way. The problem has been getting that consistent message from the evangelical community. What would you say to the faith? Would the faith community have a seat at the table in your administration? What would you say to the church community right now, a few days before this recall?
Of course they would. I mean, and that's just fundamental. I mean, the faith community is, consists of huge numbers of Californians, of many different faiths, by the way, and is absolutely fundamental to, as you know, the character of this area, but the character of the state as a whole. And it's funny, the LA Times called me a couple days ago because I spoke at some churches recently, and a couple other candidates have, and they seem to think there was something sort of untoward about this. What? You have a political candidate going to a church, or you have a faith leader like Pastor Greg Farrington, who's speaking about issues that are relevant to people's lives and politics. Which is a crazy notion that there should be any reason to raise questions about this. I mean, the American Civil Rights Movement was led by the Christian church. Yeah. This has been part of the character of our country and the most important moments of progress in our history. And so, that's my role, my view of the role of faith in public life. When your values are shaped by your faith, of course you're gonna bring those to bear in how you approach your job.
Sanctity of life. How do you feel about that?
I'm pro-life.
Yeah, and so we should not use state funding for abortions.
Correct.
That's where you're at on that.
Correct.
How about sex education? Now we have many teachers in our church who are public school, teachers, especially in these elementary age, and the curriculum is very pornographic. I mean, it's terrible what we're teaching our kids in a public education setting on sex education. Where would you fall on that?
Well, I'm very familiar with this curriculum that was passed, which is just an outrage in many respects. And it was a bill the legislature passed, although a lot of it has been implemented by the State Board of Education. And the governor can, appoint new members to that. And so there's perhaps an ability to at least rewind some of that with using executive authority. I will say this, though, while I'm absolutely with you in terms of the need to get this stuff out of our classrooms, it kind of underscores the fundamental defect of government in California is that we don't allow for local control. This curriculum has been imposed from afar, from Sacramento, and then so you go as a parent, you see what your child is being taught. You might know your school board member. They're someone who's a lot closer to you than perhaps the governor is. You can go and talk to them. You see them at the grocery store. You can go to your school board meeting, and what do they tell you? Oh, sorry, nothing we can do about it. The state's making us do it. So I've actually said the most important job for our next governor is to make it less important who the governor is by returning power to local communities and their citizens. And on top of that, what we really need is school choice, so that if you don't like what's being taught to your child in the traditional public school system, then you can take your child and the funding that is attached to them elsewhere.
That was going to be my next question. So you would support school choice?
100%. I've been fighting for it in every way I can since I've been in the legislature. And what we've seen in other states is that the COVID era, what with the shutdowns and everything else, has catalyzed a revolution in school choice. But what we're seeing in California is just the opposite. They're trying to even further restrict those forms of choice that are available. So I will say there's going to be an initiative in all likelihood on the ballot next year in 2022 that will allow funding to follow the child. I'm endorsing that initiative, and that would be a major leverage point to get the legislature to finally enact school choice as well.
That'd be great, and hopefully we could lead the nation in that. I think there's untapped potential in allowing parents to be involved in the decision where their child gets educated at.
That's right.
So let me ask you about the question of law enforcement. There's been a lot of civil unrest in our nation. We've seen it here in Sacramento, state of California. You've already talked a little bit about law enforcement. This defund the police movement. What do you think, and what is the solution to the unrest that we're feeling in our streets?
Well, the defund police, that's one of the most offensive political slogans ever concocted. And I have attended multiple services for officers who are killed in the line of duty in this area just in the 5 years since I've been in the legislature. And so when I see the level of disrespect that is directed towards law enforcement, I find it to be just an absolute travesty. And we're actually seeing this and making it harder to recruit people into the profession. And so anything that we do when it comes to the police reform, anything like that needs to begin with the recognition that our law enforcement are putting their lives on the line every single day. And we need to restore the proper reverence and respect that law enforcement deserves. And by the way, to also give them the tools they need to keep our communities safe. We've been doing just the opposite, both in Sacramento and in some of our major cities, taking tools away from law enforcement. And what are we seeing? Rising crime rates across the state, homicides rates like we haven't seen in decades.
So a big issue right now is mandates, okay? So we have mask mandates, we have vaccine mandates, and jobs are being threatened. People have given 20 years to a company and they say, if you don't get this vaccination, you're gonna lose your job. I mean, we at Destiny kind of have led the charge in the faith community saying, hey, if you have a moral conviction that you shouldn't want this vaccine, then you should apply for a religious exemption. But should we have mandates? Should there be a vaccine mandate? Should there be a mask mandate? And by no means am I saying I'm anti-vaccination. Where do you stand on the mandates?
I am against them 100%. I would seek to end them immediately. In fact, I would end them immediately by terminating the state of emergency. See, that's the really important thing. That's the most important and most impactful thing that a new governor could do immediately, is day one, minute one, terminate what has now been a 1.5 year long state of emergency. And with that, this is the important thing, by the law, all state and local emergency orders then end automatically. And in my view, that would include the mask mandates issued by school districts. That would include the vaccine mandates issued not only by the governor, but by other subsidiary levels of government. And so that would be sort of, I think, what we need to have a sort of a fresh start and to, give citizens the level of trust that they ought to have, ought to be given in a free, open, democratic society. People are more than capable of making their own choices for themselves about how to protect themselves against a virus whose risks are very well understood at this point.
Well, everybody has a story. And sometimes people get a little jaded. I'm one of them, a politician. So you've been in Sacramento 5 years. I wouldn't say that's a career politician.
Thank you.
All right. But people are a little bit, skeptical because they've seen, like you mentioned, a lot of corruption. But you have a story of your life. Why did you go into politics?
Well, I was very fortunate to grow up in this area, to go to good schools, and to be raised in an area that was anchored by the values of family, community, and faith. That gave me tremendous opportunities growing up. And like you, I love California. But I've seen in every phase of my career that those opportunities are on the decline for kids growing up in California today. As a matter of fact, 2/3 of Californians now say that kids growing up in our state today will be worse off than their parents. I mean, that's sort of the American dream is dead, is what people are saying in California. And so I had worked as a teacher in inner city Los Angeles. I had worked as an attorney defending the Constitution in our courts. I'd worked as a prosecutor of violent felons, and I'd seen in each way, kind of being on the receiving end of policy, how our state government was failing. And so I ran to try to fix it. And I've been fighting for 5 years against the dysfunction and the corruption in our legislature, against the supermajority, against the super-duper majority for the last 1.5 years, certainly, against Gavin Newsom's one-man rule. And what I've seen is exactly what you said. The corruption is that we have a political class that does not serve the people of our state. So the one thing that I've done that I think is most important is I've said I'm going to become the first state official, elected official, first state legislator in modern history not to accept any funding from special interest groups, which account for the vast majority of funding for all other legislators, hundreds of thousands of dollars per election cycle. I'm the only person who's 100% citizen-backed. And so, in this campaign for governor, we've gotten contributions from over 7,000 individual citizens. And I think that is sort of the new paradigm that we need if we're going to turn California around. And I think this recall can help bring about that paradigm shift. It'll send a loud and clear message that the era of corruption in California is over.
It is. It begins to feel like there's a grassroots movement happening. When you mentioned the recall, you can have all those images of driving down on a Saturday and seeing all the yellow and black signs of recall all over the neighborhood. And to me, that's encouraging, that we have people who are rising up, churches like Destiny, who are rising up in this moment. So a parting message, we have to vote yes on number one, but a parting message to people who are listening, why should they vote for you?
Well, I would say, as I said earlier, the most important thing is to vote yes. And so I've tried to go about my campaign as both a candidate and as an advocate for the recall itself. And so vote yes, whether you're voting for me or for someone else. But when it comes to selecting the second person, I will say this, or the person on the second question on the ballot, is having been involved in our state government for 5 years, having been fighting in the legislature for 5 years, I know exactly how broken our state government is and how to go about fixing it on day one. And that is going to be so important because they've pushed this recall off so long that we only have a year until the next election, November of 2022. And so it's going to be vitally important to be able to move quickly and aggressively and adroitly in order to get the sort of meaningful reforms that will then be visible, will be felt by people in their daily lives. And so that they can then see in 2022 that they can have a clear choice. Are we going to continue down this path of improvement and renewal, or are we going to go back to the corruption and racketeering of the Newsom years? And by the way, this is my pitch to people who, might not be used to voting for a Republican, for example, but who are frustrated with the direction of our state. This is, you can take a chance on change. Vote for the recall, give it a year, see if things improve. If they don't, you can go back to the way things were.
Absolutely. So, you almost have to go back right into campaign. If you were elected, you'd have to almost go right back into a campaign mode. And so we have 1 year to try to do something really quick. But Kevin, I want to thank you for being here. I do appreciate your service to especially our area here, Placer County. You did a great job during the lockdowns, and you were a great voice in the Sacramento legislature. Thank you for doing that. Again, best of luck. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much. And thank you for everything Destiny has done.